My name is Delroy Wall, and I'm very excited to be participating in the Kiwanis Amplify program, and even more excited to be talking with you today about strategic thinking. Strategic thinking is one of those things that seems incredibly accessible to folks because it's steeped in corporate America. What we hope today is that we can show you that strategic thinking is something we do every day and give you the tools to level up that skill to help you achieve your goals. We're going to start by outlining the learning objectives for today to ground you in what we're going to be talking about. Before we dive in today, though, I want to make sure that we're grounded in the learning objectives for this module so that you know what are the skills that we're going to be working on and what are the things you're going to walk away from this lesson with. The first thing we're going to do is to define strategic thinking. And we're going to give you kind of the big corporate definition, but we're also going to give you one that's a little bit more accessible as well. We're also going to identify the components of the situation action result model, which is the model we'll be using to level up your strategic thinking skill. Next, we're going to employ that model to talk about a problem through scenario work. And then we're going to hypothesize a solution to a problem with its corresponding strategic plan. Sounds good? Let's dive in. The first thing we're going to do today is define strategic thinking. But we've all heard this term before. So before we move on, I'd like you to take a second to jot down a couple answers or think about what your definition of strategic thinking is. Got it? Good. You probably wrote things down like a way to solve a problem or a plan to solve a problem. And those are great answers. They're also right answers. Strategic thinking is really just a novel way to solve an existing problem. Right? It's the mental or thinking process applied in the context of achieving success. So even when you're thinking about how am I going to replace this thing that I broke, you can think about that situation strategically and solve it strategically as well. Let's take a deeper look. A big part of being a good strategic thinker is to making sure that you're taking time to reflect on the problem that you're trying to solve. Now, we may not always have this luxury. Sometimes problems need to be solved quickly. But in the majority of the cases where you're going to be creating a strategic plan, you'll have some time to reflect. And so we're going to model that behavior today. What I'd like you to do is to take a moment and just reflect on some of the problems that you solved. So go ahead and pause this video for about a minute or two and really think about this and write down what are the major questions that you're asking yourselves or the major things that you're thinking through? And we'll be back to talk about it. Good job on taking some time to reflect. Now let's continue. Most folks, when they think about solving problems, are going to really bucket them into three major questions that they're going to ask themselves. The first is what is the thing that's causing the problem or the challenge? That is going to be the situation. The next thing is what will I do? What actions will I take to solve this problems? And those are going to be your actions. And the last thing is what will happen? What's going to result from me taking these actions? And that is the result. And those are the three major parts of the situation, action, result model. Now that we've been introduced to the basics of the situation, action, result model, let's take a look at a scenario so that we can more deeply understand how to talk about each of the three phases. Take a minute to read through this scenario, and we'll be back to talk through the situation, the action, and what the potential results could be. What a relatable scenario, right? I mean, how many times have you been in crunch time and your internet or technology has stopped working and you just have to figure something out really quick to get the job done? So let's examine this using the situation action model really quickly. The situation here is that you have a meeting and your internet is down and you need to figure out what you're going to do. Now, the actions that you take here, there's no right or wrong answer. You could decide to reach out to postpone the meeting. You could decide to try to troubleshoot getting this internet issue fixed by yourself or with a professional, or you could ask a friend or a colleague who understands what you're doing to represent you in the meeting while you work things out. There's no right answer. We just want you to think through the possibilities. Now, what results would you expect? Like, based on what you do, you're either going to be in this meeting or you're not. Whether it's in 30 minutes or you've decided to reschedule it, there's not a lot that can happen here. But as we continue deeper into the situation action result model and expand it, you'll see that it can be used for these simple situations and also some more complex ones. So let's take a look at those. All right, so it's time to look at a more complex issue and to talk about what the components of the situation action result model are. We're going to use this scenario to exemplify how to think about those components. So feel free to pause the video if you need some time to read through this scenario before we move on. But we're going to go ahead and dive in. So the first thing we need to do when thinking through the situation is we need to identify the challenge we're facing. In the scenario that we're using, it's clear that there's going to be some issues with the bus company not showing up, which is not going to be great if you're trying to transport 50 people to this community engagement event that you've planned. So the challenge is, how do we get these 50 people to that event with the short amount of time that we have, and the fact that we've already lost 50% of the budget, potentially because we're not hearing back from this company? The next thing we want to do is think about how we can solve this problem. So what is your hypothesis? What is the thing you think is going to be able to fix this? Potentially, you could reach out to your network to see if there are enough volunteers who drove to the meetup point who would be willing to kind of throw everyone in their cars and drive them to the event. This is just one potential hypothesis, and there's many other ways that you can solve this problem. The other thing you want to think about is what are your reasons for thinking this will work? What is the reasoning behind the hypothesis? Why do you think it's going to be successful? Why do you think it's going to not be successful? It is important that you weigh the pros and cons of each of the moves that you're about to take. The last thing we want to think about in the situation phase is what are the assumptions that you're making, right? If I'm saying, hey, let's get everyone in cars and drive to this event, I'm making a big assumption that folks are going to want to take on the responsibility and liability of potentially transporting people who they may not even know or work with that often. As we're thinking through the situation, once we've made a decision about what the hypothesis we want to run, we need to then start to plan out our actions. And in doing so, we need to decide what experiment we can use to test this hypothesis. Is there a way for us to run a really short experiment that gives us some results that we can say, hey, this is successful or this is not successful, that will allow us to make quick decisions about how we will move forward? Another thing to think about as you're planning out your actions is, who can you partner with to achieve success? Who are the people that you're going to need to bring in and notify and identify as folks who need to be a part of this solution? Also, you need to think about the costs. How much is it going to cost to run this experiment? Not just the cost in money, but also time, and maybe even the cost to the reputation that you've built up. Because sometimes you do need to spend money, time, and a little bit of your influence to push your plans through to fruition. Now, as we're getting to the final stages of creating this plan, we need to think about the results. How will we measure the success of our experiment? How will we decide to keep moving forward, to change our plans, or to completely stop running this experiment because it's just not working? We need to think about those things as we're trying to figure out how to solve this problem strategically. And the last thing is what are the risks? What are the risks that, even though you've taken all this time to plan this carefully, can hinder your success? What are the things that may show up at the last minute, that may not work out the way that you think they're going to work out, that would cause your plan to fail? And so these are the things we want to think about in the context of building our strategic plan. So that was a lot to take in. Trust me, I understand. But as we're thinking about how to be good strategic thinkers and creating effective strategic plans, we need to take all of these components into consideration. Now, not every strategic plan or every strategy is going to require you to go deep into each of these things. When we're thinking about how we get our internet back on, we may not need to spend a lot of time evaluating our assumptions or talking about the risks that we're going to face. But when we're planning a really large trip that's going to involve multiple people outside of our organization, we may want to spend more time thinking about each of these components. We wanted to give you these tools so you'd be able to use them effectively the next time you're thinking about tackling a problem. Now, before we go, we did want to talk a little bit about the post-work exercise that you're going to be working on. So we've expanded the scenario from the previous example, and what we want you to do is to think about what your strategic plan would look like. How would you present this to the Kiwanis Club if they came to you and asked you to expand this initiatives? We're going to provide you with the backbone and a potential deck for you to use, but we want you to take some time to fill in all these components and really think about this strategically and flex that muscle. Thank you, and have a good day.